Hello. Welcome everyone to Osher's 2022 Lit Night. My name is Pam Allen, and I am the founder and organizer of this yearly literary event. Through the years, I began to realize there were many of us who had begun writing under the guidance of Osher study leaders. I thought a literary event would be an opportunity to present the work of published and unpublished Osher members. The first literary evening began in the year 2010 and was held at the Dartmouth Outing Club. And now, thanks to Zoom, we're meeting again this year online. I looked through the roster of presenters over the years, and there have been approximately 60 Osher poets and authors who have presented. As always, I want to thank the staff, Lisa, Diane, Laura, and Sarah, who have always helped to support this event. We're so very fortunate to have their expertise. And tonight, I want to give special thanks to Sarah Chamberlain, who makes these webinar events possible. This evening, there will be 4 poets and authors. If you have a question at the end for any of us, put our name in the Q&A box and address that person directly. And at the end of the presentation, we'll try to answer your individual questions. For our first presenter, I'd like to welcome Rai Donaray. Dr. Rai Donaray teaches at colleges and universities in the US and overseas. Her poetry is in several anthologies, including a 21st Century Plague, Poetry from a Pandemic. But her passion is in the culture of medieval Occitania. She composes and sings troubadour-style songs, gives performances and presentations in the US and France, and has just finished a novel about Esclarmonde de Foix. Rai is an Osher study leader. Please welcome Rai.
Thank you very much, Pam. I'm delighted to present some of the 53 poets in a 21st Century Plague, Poetry from the Pandemic. Mundane, profound, agonizing, uplifting, examining challenges and addressing anxieties. It reflects in words well chosen, a shared experience of what others feel but maybe cannot express. This anthology was compiled and edited by Elaine Clift and published last year by University Professors Press. Although many of the poets are or have been university professors, there are also novelists, nurses, artists, and numerous vocations. The first poem I'm going to read is by Elaine Clift. She's a writer and journalist who taught at Yale for many years. This is the last of her pandemic trilogy. It's entitled Pandemic Pain. In the beginning, while in survival mode, we masked, distanced, and washed our hands like mad Lady Macbeth, hoping the virus would bypass us, lucky ones, untouched, safe, exempt. Then, as the weeks wore on, we found ourselves frayed and frightened, anxious and depressed, while the beast grew bolder. Entering crisis mode, tempers flared, tears flowed, trips for groceries became a call for celebration. Haircuts a miraculous event, release from house arrest. Precious family and friends risked a distant contact at outdoor lunch. We Zoomed, FaceTimed, Skyped, vowing to carry on in COVID solitude, awaiting the darkness of winter. The next one is by Miriam Aronan. She's the author of several children's books. She's a retired librarian who worked at the Magnus Museum and the University of California, Berkeley. Her poem is entitled Hands. In this time of contagion, I imagine hands, gloved hands, wary of touching, hands raw from scrubbing, fisted hands lifted in protests, frail hands afraid, hands burying the dead in unmarked graves, hands lighting memorial candles, pleading hands begging for bread, clock hands marking time that has slowed, like yesterday and tomorrow, farther than the mind can endure. empty hands, needing to create something out of nothing. We wash our hands of it, this pain we cannot bear. Hands painting the empty landscapes of pandemic, weaving threads into masks, writing the poetry of virus. Piano hands, easing our days. Healing hands, soothing the sick and dying. Hands lifting you up and carrying you to safety. Clapping hands, saying thank you. Hands soil-filled, turning rocks, planting seeds, tending gardens. Calloused hands from heavy lifting. Hands picking our fruit and vegetables. Those hands too. In this time of contagion, I will myself to lift my hands in praise. Instead of a handshake, hands meeting in peace. Namaste. Hands blessing water and wine, breaking bread together, hands joined in dance. Give me your hand, I'll give you mine. The next one's one actually that I wrote. It was originally a song, and then I shortened it and made it into a poem. You might still be able to hear some of the cadences in it too. It's called Plagues. The Black Death it was called, the bubonic plague, as nasty a death as can be. From India, Persia, and Africa, it sailed across the sea. On the back of rats, so quickly passed by the bite of an infected flea. The lymph nodes swelled, the pustules grew, the disease on a rapid spree. When the enemy came and flew under the doors, people quickly shuttered their stores, remaining fearful within. They shook and quaked to contemplate. It had been caused by mortal sin. For 30 days, no ships appeared, 40 for quarantine. Now that a new plague has arrived, no one can be sure of their fate. An invisible virus spreading itself as it learned to quickly mutate. Tests were few, cures obscure, vaccine for many too late. We masked ourselves, stayed indoors, prepared for a very long wait. Plagues, plagues, there have always been plagues, not easy to combat, yet we endure and pray no more, as so many have done before. And the next poem is going to be one by Marion Deutsche Cohen. She's the author of 32 collections of poetry and memoir. She teaches at Drexel University. This is called Things I Do More of These Days. Read books on bottom shelves. Understand Sylvia Plath. Read and write email. Nap and look at the clock. 4:30 already, I remark to John if he's nearby, to myself if he isn't. I say it matter-of-factly, but I mean it happily. 4:30 used to be a negative thing, especially at 4:30 p.m. My sister and I used to call that minute flabby. Flabby meant not having accomplished anything that day. Now the time doesn't have to be 4:30 in order to be flabby. Now we can have accomplished a whole lot of anything and still feel flabby. Yes, 4:30 these days is a positive time, closer to dinner time, closer to movie time, closer to bedtime, closer to when we have accomplished whatever we will accomplish that day. And the fifth poem, Novel Virus, is by Daniel Williams. Living in the Yosemite region of the Sierra Nevada mountains, he's taught at various colleges. Novel virus. Why use a literary term to describe a virus when the adjective new would do? A novel is at least 100 pages filled with life and love, romance and glory. This is just invisible rats ravaging our breath. Instead, let's call it coronavirus short story. And the sixth poem is by Frank Salvidio. He's a poet and author of books on Sappho, Dante, and King Arthur. It's a very poignant poem. It's called COVID-19. "87 years old with heart disease, as if created for these very times to walk alone, to stumble, cough, and sneeze. to calculate and number out new rhymes for just one sonnet more, and try to say again what has been said already, and yet try to say it in some other way that has been said in poems now at hand? Shall I speak of her as I have before, or fashion aphorisms treating love or truth, time, eternity, life and death, or this special providence I'm now part of? Be brief, but still tell all there is to tell. A minor poet died, a sparrow fell. And the last poem I'm going to read today is by Brother Richard Hendrick. He is a priest friar of the Irish branch of the Capuchin order, Franciscan order. His poem Lockdown went viral on the internet, and I think as I read it, maybe you'll understand why. Yes, there is fear. Yes, there is isolation. Yes, there is panic buying. Yes, there is sickness. Yes, there is even death. But they say that in Wuhan, after so many years of noise, you can hear the birds sing again. They say that just after just a few weeks of quiet, the sky is no longer thick with fumes, but blue and gray and clear. They say that in the streets of Assisi, people are singing to each other across the empty squares, keeping their windows open so that those who are alone may hear the sounds of family around them. They say that a hotel in the west of Ireland is offering free meals and delivery to the housebound. Today, a young woman I know is busy spreading flyers with her number through the neighborhood so that the elders may have someone to call on. Today, churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples are preparing to welcome and shelter the homeless, the sick, the weary. All over the world, people are slowing down and reflecting. All over the world, people are looking at their neighbors in a new way. All over the world, people are waking up to a new reality, to how big we really are, to how little control we really have, to what really matters, to love. So we pray and we remember that, yes, there is fear, but there does not have to be hate. Yes, there is isolation, but there does not have to be loneliness. Yes, there is panic buying, but there does not have to be meanness. But there does not, yes, there is sickness, but there does not have to be disease of the soul. Yes, there is even death, but there can always be a rebirth of love. Wake to the choices you make as to how to live now. Today, breathe. Listen. Behind the factory noises of your panic, the birds are singing again. The sky is clearing. Spring is coming, and we are always encompassed by love. Open the windows of your soul, and though you may not be able to touch across the empty square, sing. Thank you. There are so many other poems, but these are just the ones that I chose, and I hope you like them. This is the book.
Thank you, Rai.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the Q&A, yeah, thanks a lot. A transplanted Canadian from the University of Toronto, Hilary Llewellyn Thomas, is a professor emeritus at Dartmouth College's Geisel School of Medicine. She's published over 100 peer-reviewed scientific papers, but Arrows Loose and Keen is her first novel. Hilary was inspired to write the story when she discovered that the key personalities in this drama, Margaret de Baud-Lesnier, Baron Baud-Lesnier, Edward II, and Queen Isabella, are her 19 great-grandparents. Hilary is Osher's vice president-elect. Please welcome Hilary.
Thank you so much, Pam, for those generous words. Yes, this is as yet my first novel, Arrows Loosed and Keen. I'm going to read to you the opening pages, and there is a time shift partway through, so I hope I don't lose folks along the way. It's the first few pages of a 400-page novel. Eek. Anyway, shows you what you can get up to if you're retired, right? So Arrows Loose and Keen begins mid-October in the year 1321. Normally, Margaret de Battlesmere sent teams of kitchen servants on regular expeditions to the neighboring Kentish farms, manors, and abbeys. Normally, hunters from the garrison prowled the forests that surrounded Leeds Castle, searching for deer and beating the undergrowth for wild fowl. Normally, those efforts were enough to maintain the regular stores, the drying rooms, salted and smoked meats, the pantry's grain barrels and its bins of turnips and onions, the kegs of ale lying in the pool of the buttery, and the feed in the granary for the stables and the hen houses. These were not normal times. Now armed guards rode with the kitchen servants, driving the provision carts deeper and deeper into the countryside to buy, barter, and confiscate. But the guards reported there was little to collect. Ceaseless rainfall had once again plagued the summer with flooded fields and ruined harvests, and the returning servants drove half-empty wagons up to the castle's kitchen doors. Now the hunters in the woods found little game. The deer had moved further inland, away from the sodden forest's exhausted browsing sites. All the ground-dwelling birds had followed the deer, and there was nothing in the air to shoot, since the migratory birds had fled to Spain and the coasts of Africa. When the hunters trudged back into the courtyard, they carried flat game sacks and full quivers. Margaret ordered half rations for the scores of people living within the castle walls, and soon thoughts of food haunted everyone. Each day, she led council meetings with her garrison officers, during which she split into two selves. On the surface, she talked and acted as a seasoned leader, never resting against her cushioned chair back as she listened, questioned, and listened again. A wide landscape of problems spread before her, which she considered in its full breadth. There wasn't enough feed for the horses. The men might need to eat the horses. Eating the horses could undermine the men's morale. But beneath that surface, she was frightened. And although she held her back straight, she often sat on her hands to hide their faint tremor. Dear God, keep my children safe, my son, my daughters. 6 months earlier, on Wednesday, May the 12th in 1321, halfway up the armory staircase, Margaret stopped and pressed a hand against her ribs. Months before she had given birth, yet still her breath came short. She reached for a side wall to steady herself, then shrank away. The castle's stones were forever cold, cold enough to freeze the soul. She climbed again, and on the uppermost floor walked into Barr's workroom. He sat at his trestle desk waiting. She offered a slight bow. You summoned me? Be comfortable, dear wife. Smiling, he pointed to a bench. I've happy news about Gemma and Tilly and Beth. She perched on the bench edge. He had news about their eldest daughters, something she didn't already know? That wasn't possible. He stood, crossed to his tall cabinet, and unlocked its double doors. They swung open, revealing shelves stacked with wide, flat wooden boxes. He pulled one out and carried it to his desk. In here, I keep all my land charters. Listen, I've given each girl 3 manors. That is most generous. Truly, never was Barr open-handed. Which manors? He lifted the box's lid and retrieved several parchment sheets. Here's 3 charters. These are Gemma's. Here are 3 more for Tilly. And Beth's 3. He stacked them all together and passed the pile to her. What do they say? Use your eyes, dear wife. You're proud of your reading skills. Let's see how well you understand. She shuffled through the land charters, skimming the lawyer's tortuous Latin subclauses stacked upon subclauses, picking out the place names and the key verbs. These are for 9 of my manors. No. for Nina what used to be my manors. Once she had owned many such manors scattered across northern England, but when she married, they all became his property. Such was the price of protection. Very good, my dear. I've granted 3 to each girl as dowry manors. Dowry? Hear my happy news. This summer, each girl will marry. No, you can't. Oh, but I can. He pulled from the cabinet another document box. In here, all my agreements. He collected 3 parchments and passed them to her. Look, they're marriage contracts. These were dated at Westminster Hall a month earlier in mid-April, shortly before her own 29th birthday. She read the first few lines, now threading the clauses together. What have you done? The parchments weighed heavy in her hands. No need for distress. She dropped the foul things on the desktop. Gemma's 7 years old. Tilly's only 6. Beth's just 3. She stood. Where to start? Be careful. Bar could be difficult when crossed. She sat. Who are these men? This July, on the 23rd, here in my castle's chapel, Gemma will marry William de Ross, Baron of Helmsley. He's how old? 28. Who is he? Why has he waited till now to marry? Bar waved a hand, a difficult task, but now he's called to Parliament. He'll be a strong ally in the North. And on the wedding day, he'll give me a pile of silver. I need ready money. Who else? Tilly marries on the 25th of July, 2 days after Gemma, also here in my chapel. That'll be most convenient. Convenient. Who? Robert Fitzpaine. He's 16. Son of Sir Robert Fitzpaine. His father's a power in the Welsh marches and wants a foothold in England for his son. Clever, eh? I need that alliance too. Fitzpaine and his father, they'll ride here for the wedding, bring me silver. Beth, at last you're seeing sense. On June the 27th, a month before Gemma's and Beth's weddings, I think that's well planned, don't you? Beth will marry almost 14-year-old. He paused for effect. Edmund de Mortimer, Roger de Mortimer's son. A truly brilliant marriage. Soon, Roger de Mortimer will be the King's Lieutenant of Ireland. See the advantages for me? But she's only 3. How can she possibly? Edmund and Beth, they'll marry in the Mortimer's chapel at Ernwood Manor. That's in Shropshire, so we'll travel there. They're just children. They mustn't go away with those men. She swallowed. Quiet, a shrill voice was dangerous. Our girls must live with me till they become women. I insist, 12 at least. That's what our courts say. And so says the church. A child can't understand the sanctity of. Why would men such as Ross and Fitzpaine and even young Mortimer want to take away a bride before she bleeds? Pay attention. Read those contracts in full. Thank you.
Wow. I want to know what happens next. Oh my. Thank you, Hillary. Carol Westberg, 3rd poetry collection, Icelands, appeared in January 2022. Terra Infirma was a finalist for the Tampa Review Prize for Poetry, and Slipstream was a finalist for the New Hampshire Literary Award for Outstanding Book of Poetry, and Tyranny of Dreams was chosen for the New Hampshire Poet Laureates Poet Showcase. Carol is a new member of Osher's Leadership Council. Please welcome Carol Westberg.
Thank you so much, Pam. Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes, I'm going to be reading from Iceland, and some of you, the image on the cover is by Leah Rothstein, who many of you may know because she's local and a wonderful artist. So I'm going to start with a poem called Road to Nowhere. The road to nowhere levitates, undulates, sweats, and seethes in summer. In winter, buckles, cracks, swallows unsuspecting cars in potholes grown huge. Does macadam have no feelings for the wind, sun and moon and stars? Trucks rumble along its surface, pulling woolly horses and cargo unseen. Priests and thieves, immigrants and citizens, none with proper documents for this life or the next. Each passenger parts the air, stirs up dust, blind to a mirage of willows genuflecting, reflected in a stream that can't hear our sighs. Kansas loves its open spaces bordering Oklahoma, boundaries unmarked. Roads striking out across no one's land, not your land, not my land. The road to nowhere leads past sun-bleached bones, singing danger, wonder, always wide surprise at the end. Okay, the next poem is called This Too. Jacaranda, bougainvillea, agapanthus, sand. Barefoot under a splendiferous moon, mackerel clouds between, not knowing how far the ocean will recede from the boardwalk near the Mondego River's mouth. We return to a place we call home, sit and watch a box turtle cross the flat stone path in our yard, mosaic temple toting his altar, not charting happy or sad, so far as we know. Excuse me, in the mid-latitudes. We live in the mid-latitudes, mostly free to venture in and out of zones of comfort, hands warm enough to grasp a pen or knife, to carve into an onion, radish, spotted pig. We want to live free of diatribes, to explore boundaries of awareness, to note each turn toward the sensate world we share with bats, dragonfish, spider silk, fire. Some say once it's over, this life is gone. But we want to live on beyond unknown ghosts hovering, silence deepening in the polar regions. Forgive the troubles I've caused for beauty, for love. I want to comfort each raging heart, starting with my own. Don't want my daughters to have to sort through fiery rants in the black journals I plan to burn. Do want to spare them zones of discomfort, truths long disinherited in this steady state flinch and hum. Strong winds prevail now. Rain sheets through twin pines, fallen, still belonging to the seismic incorruptions of this world. And this poem is called Bitter House. In my fear, I'll end up bitter as chicory and alone, alone, wind whipping long grasses in the dunes. With my fear, I'll end up like the husband I left in the wake of my faithlessness. Both of us wandering a wilderness of concrete streets, no one to go home to, no one to talk to in the swaddling dark. Past my fear, I'll end up bitter as burdock root, like a child beaten with her father's studded belt, grown scarred and angry, leaving home afraid of no ghost more than her father, living alone. I'm not alone in my fear. I'll end up like my ex, who fears his next wife will leave him, and she does. I've grown wary of acrid greens, brew bitter nail tea, serve kiwi and pepitas as antidotes to soothe my two grown daughters, thin as reeds, and not alone in their fear. They'll end up on some windswept coast, scudding along like sea foam, left quivering on damp sand. So I'll read two more poems. The next one is called Inch by Inch, and it starts with an epigraph from the poet Grace Paley, whom I'm sure many of you know. As you reside in the house, so it must be a home in your mind. I know this house, how sun filters in my study window in each season, which crystal doorknob has come loose again, which door scrapes the wooden floor we intend to refinish before we leave this, our last house. How attached I've grown since we applied for community living, a place each will leave in a body bag. You likely before me, though no one knows for sure. This morning, I pour hot water into the Japanese teapot a friend gave me decades ago. Small work of art crafted to hold heat, every inch meant for its job. Will you come too, little teapot? Your black iron knob shines from daily touch. Concentric circles out to the lid's edge echo down sloping sides. How mysterious the friendships that endure, traveling wherever I reside. We'll move to our last home soon, not a house like the one we're leaving. I'll measure furniture to fit 3 rooms, choose a few stones and shells carried home from Moose Mountain, Drake's Bay, and far countries I dream of seeing again. Will the daughter want the rocker my father made, or the one found in the hills of San Francisco the day my water broke? Which books shall I take, give away? Oh, cherished space, mine's home. I know each thing will be released. Okay, and I'm ending with a poem called Old Riddle. Boiling water swirls in the pot. The egg drops from my spoon, and I turn down the heat, legs naked as Derrida's before my cat, who licks any bare skin he can reach. Would he gnaw my bones underneath? In Sweden, my ancestors' descendants compost human remains, freeze a corpse in liquid nitrogen, shatter it into tiny pieces, nugget-sized, to mix with bacteria in biodegradable boxes to bury in the earth. How useful to continue in this way. Today, I watch the egg slow in its swirl. Look a little deeper and see the borders aren't fixed between my mother and the chicken, the egg and me. Thank you very much.
Mesmerizing, Carol. Wonderful. Throughout all of the presentations, Dally has been sitting so quietly in his wing chair. It's an amazement. I'm glad you're relaxed. Dally Walker is a retired surgeon. He is the author of 2 collections of short stories, Surgeon Stories and The Doctor's Dilemma. Dally's work has been published in numerous literary reviews and magazines, including The Atlantic. His stories have been shortlisted for Best American Short Stories and an O. Henry Award and nominated for 2 Pushcart Prizes. Dally is an Osher study leader, teaching fiction writing, and serves as fiction editor for Columbia University's Intima, a journal of narrative medicine. Please welcome Dally, and I wish that next year we can meet all together in person at some venue so we can see each other live and not on this screen. I mean, you all look wonderful, but nevertheless, Dally, welcome.
Thank you, Pam. I'm going to read to you a story from my collection, The Doctor's Dilemma, that Pam mentioned. I was a battalion surgeon in Vietnam, and I've written about war, often from a surgeon's point of view. And the story I'm going to read is a story about war. Its title is Boots on the Ground. I had previously chosen something less dark to read, but the events of the past few days, the war in Ukraine, the wars in Buffalo supermarket, and a grade school in Texas, and got me thinking about war again and remembering what it was like. I believe it's worth reminding everyone how terrible it is, in hopes that something can be done to stop the carnage. So I'll now read Boots on the Ground. It first appeared in Dartmouth's medical school literary publication, Lifelines. Boots on the Ground. Lieutenant Colonel Stone's pulse pounded from the adrenaline rush of the resuscitation. The career Army medical officer was in the trauma bay of a surgical hospital he commanded in Afghanistan. A Navy SEAL had been shot in the chest and femoral artery. Stone had stemmed the bleeding in the man's mutilated leg. He inserted a chest tube in his left pleural cavity to expand a collapsed lung. The patient was now in the operating room, having his leg amputated. The floor was dappled with blood. Red paint flung from a brush. Stone exhaled a long, deep breath and slumped into a chair. The strain of war lined his narrow face. He was pleased with the way he and his team had performed. A leg lost, but a life saved. He developed a way of thinking that made the maimed seem not quite so maimed. Stone's tour of duty ended tomorrow. Then he would fly home from this bleak and savage land. The idea of going from war to peace somehow daunted Stone. It was as if he had lost his touch with all the beauty and wonders of life. The telephone in the nurse's desk rang. An African-American master sergeant in scrubs answered it. He looked up at Stone and offered him the receiver. "It's for you, sir," he said, "the morgue." Stone reached for the receiver. "Colonel Stone here. Sorry to bother you, sir," an accented voice said. "Sergeant Martinez here. We need you for a death certification." Stone could have assigned the task of filling out death certificates to a lower-ranking medical officer, but he chose to do so because it kept him in touch with the darkness of war and cognizant of the human sacrifices battle required. "I'll be right there," he said. Stone stepped out into the Afghan afternoon. A blast of scorched air greeted him. The sun beat down and made him squint. He put on a pair of silver aviator shades that blanked his eyes. On a sandy path, he headed toward the morgue, a ramshackle tin-roof building near the airstrip. Stone's blue shadow passed scraggly trees and piles of rocks. From somewhere in the distance came the thud of artillery fire. Stone felt weary of war. He believed nobody knew how to win. He wasn't even certain what winning would be. Stone opened the metal door to the morgue and stepped inside. He was relieved to be out of the heat and wind. A pungent odor of embalming fluid stung his nostrils. Martinez, a muscular sergeant on the mortuary affairs staff, saluted him. A member of an Army Reserve unit from San Juan, the non-com wore a rubber apron over an olive drab t-shirt and fatigue pants. His cheeks were acne scarred. His black hair and mustache were turning gray. There was something sorrowful in the way he moved and in his downcast eyes. "Good morning, sir," he said in a hushed voice. "Buenos dias, Martinez," Stone said. "How's it going?" "Likewise, sir." Martinez led him to a stainless steel embalming table. On it lay a body encased in a heavy-duty black vinyl bag. Stone worked his hands into a pair of latex gloves. There was a chemical taste in his mouth that he tried to swallow away. He reached down and slowly, almost reluctantly, unzipped the body bag so he could examine the remains. In his deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan, Stone had seen the most mutilating wounds possible: decapitations, quadruple amputations from IEDs, children with half of their faces blown away by bombs and high-velocity rifles. Sometimes they were just body parts. In spite of all of his years as a war surgeon, he'd always dreaded what he might find inside a body bag. Stone looked down at the mangled soldier. His face was scorched. His hair and eyebrows had been burned away. Stone picked up the soldier's left arm. It was stiff with rigor mortis. The fingers of his hand were gone. The heat of the explosion had melted the Kevlar strike plate of the man's body armor and welded it to his chest. Stone thought he'd seen everything that weaponry could do, but this was something new. He shook his head. Who was this young man in the real world? Somebody's son, he thought. Somebody's brother. Maybe he was married. Maybe he had kids. Stone picked up the dog tag that was on a chain around the man's neck. He looked at it. "Martinez, what do you know about Private Nelson?" he asked. "He was a door gunner, sir," the sergeant said. "His Black Hawk was shot down yesterday. An RPG hit the fuel tank. His body was retrieved early today." "Where did it happen?" "In Kandahar," the sergeant said. "If you want to watch the chopper crash, you can see it on an Islamic website. It shows towel heads dragging him by his ankles through the street." The desecration of Private Nelson's body caused Stone to shudder. He tried to find some meaning in the soldier's death, but he found none. He'd come to believe that only in living was there significance. Stone stripped off the rubber gloves and dropped them in a wastebasket. "You know," he said, "dying should be an old man's game." "Yes, sir," Martinez said, "but it won't be as long as there's war." "Sad but true," Stone said. He turned and walked slowly to a desk in the corner of the morgue. From a file, he pulled out a blank death certificate. Medical school had taught him to be a keeper of life, but now he was a certifier of death. The thought depressed him. Stone sat down on a stool and stared at the wall. He couldn't stop brooding about the dead door gunner. Why had Nelson joined the army? Was it starry-eyed patriotism, a broken heart? Maybe he couldn't find a job. Maybe he just wanted to fight. Stone started filling out the forms, but he kept thinking about the young soldier. Why had this happened to him? Why did it happen the way it did? Everything about war seemed cruelly accidental and random and made no sense. When he finished with the forms, Stone took out a leather-bound journal from the pocket of his fatigues. Recorded in the pages were the names of all the men whose death certificates he had signed. Keeping score that way made the death seem more real. As he entered Nelson's name in the journal, a heaviness bore down on him that pushed him deep inside himself. Stone wanted to cry, but he didn't. He'd come to doubt that there was a loving God, but he bowed his head and silently asked the Lord to bless Nelson's soul and end the war. The phone rang. Martinez answered it. He covered the receiver in his hand and called to Stone. "It's the trauma base, sir. They need you. They got a wounded Taliban." "Oh, good," Stone said. "He's stable?" "I don't know. They said stat. It might be the guy who killed Nelson. I wouldn't be in any hurry." "Do no fucking harm," Stone told himself. He looked at Martinez. "Unfortunately, that's not the way it works, Sergeant." Stone said, "Tell him I'm on my way." Stone rose from his chair. He hurried out of the door into a hot wind. He could feel the ground heat rising through the cleated soles of his rapid deployment combat boots. The following days, Stone walked toward the helicopter that was to take him on the first leg of his trip out of Afghanistan. The air was hot and dry, the sky the color of smoke. The fierce wind moved the stench of burning garbage to him. From the entry to the morgue, Martinez appeared in his rubber apron. He came to attention and saluted. The colonel returned the salute and gave him a thumbs up. Beside the sergeant was Private Nelson's metal casket, draped in an American flag. The coffin was waiting for an honor guard to load it into a C-130 that would transport the dead soldier to the state. For a moment, Stone pictured the horror Nelson had been through, his chopper bursting into flames, the Kevlar body armor fusing to his chest. The name politicians in Washington who gave soldiers like Nelson came to Stone and echoed in his mind, boots on the ground. Stone took a deep breath. He turned and headed toward the helicopter. From the mountains to the north came the thump of artillery fire. Stone's footsteps left powdery tracks in the dust.
Thank you, Dally.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for, it was great. It was great. I really appreciate it. We do have somebody in the chat. Oh, that's from Sarah, who says, if you have a question, tap the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar and put your questions in there. I have some questions before they come into the box. I'll start with Dally. When did you start writing?
When I was 4 years old, I guess.
Did you?
Seriously writing, probably in my mid 40s, I decided I wanted to learn how to write. I'd been a literature major in college as well as a pre-med, but I hadn't done a lot of writing. So I took some courses at Indiana University near where I practiced, and been writing ever since. So mid-career, I did it.
Good for you. I know many doctors who are poets and writers, and I find that amazing. You're such a busy schedule with being a surgeon and then writing also. It's wonderful. That's wonderful. I have the same question for Carol. I've known Carol a very long time. So I'm curious when you started writing poetry.
There's the diary writing when you're a young kid. I started writing poetry very quietly, and not that I would show to anybody in my teens. And then, in my 20s, I got much more serious about it. The thing that helped me most, honestly, was going to Vermont College to get my MFA. That was just a wonderful experience. I worked with such great people, and it was very affirming. And then I started, that you have to write a manuscript. Not only, you do presentations and all kinds of things, but then the manuscript became my first book. So
wonderful, wonderful. I first started writing right here at Osher when it was Iliad. Wow. And that was with Mame Willie, who taught reading and writing poetry. And that was it was like the year 2000. And that's when I first put pen to paper. So it's very interesting to see people's process. She helped a
lot of people.
She helped a lot of people. And some of us went on to get degrees. And there were several people that took Osher courses, that was Iliad courses back then, who I see in journals, so forth and so on. So it's interesting. We have 2 Q&A. I have questions for other people too. I could keep asking questions, but let's see what we got here. Dally, what are you reading these days? That's from Bobby Margols. What are you reading these days?
I've been reading a collection of short stories by Russian authors that George Saunders uses to teach his classes at Syracuse. And I've been using them, having people taking my fiction writers workshop each week. We read one of the Russian authors and try to apply it to the writing they're doing.
And Mary Lee wants to know, why did you choose the short story rather than novels?
I guess the same reason I went into surgery instead of internal medicine. I'm a little bit impatient, I guess. I like to see things finished and move on. I've written some novels, and I'm a better short story writer.
Interesting. Rye, I have a question for you. It says that you have just finished a novel, Esclarmonde de Foix, which I'm probably murdering the pronunciation, but can you tell us about your novel?
Sure. It's the subtitle on, well, the title is of the novel is 1209, The Devil's Crusade. And the subtitle is The Church's War of Genocide Against Southern France. It's about the Albigensian Crusade, Esclarmonde de Foix, or Esclarmonde de Foix, to give her Occitan name, was the leader of the spiritual resistance against the Crusade. The Crusade killed about 1 million people, slaughtered about 1 million people, and destroyed the culture of Occitania, which was an extremely sophisticated and progressive society. It's probably where the Renaissance would have taken place. If not for the Crusade, possibly even the Reformation would have taken place. It was the land of the troubadours, and where women had probably as close to equal rights as you could get during the Renaissance. And Esclarmonde de Foix was an amazing heroine, and I'd like her to be more well known and more recognized. It's about time.
Has your book been published yet?
No, not yet.
On the way, on the way. And Hillary, I'm intrigued about your heritage. How did you find that out? How did that happen?
Yeah, that happened because, well, for a long time, I had in the background in my family an interest in writing fiction. My grandmother published a number of books back in the 30s. My uncle published science fiction while being a physician. And a cousin of mine, his daughter, published a number of murder mysteries. So when I retired, I thought, okay, maybe I can take a stab at this. Yeah, hubris, right? But in the meantime, a close friend of mine who had retired just a year before I had got caught up in ancestry work and said, you got to do this, you got to do this. And I thought, oh, well, all right. But I remembered a story my grandmother had told about ancestry stories she had uncovered back in the 50s. And I thought, all right, okay, I'm going to try this. And anyway, and just as we've heard from earlier speakers now, I discovered so much about the stories of women whose stories hadn't really been told or had gone through a particular filter. That is the filter of who got to write the history. And the one that really grabbed me was the story about Margaret, my 19th great grandmother, who turned out to be the first woman to be imprisoned in the Tower of London, and it was illegally so, with her 5 young children. Several of them are mentioned in this little bit I've given you already. And I thought, all right, I got to start doing this story. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It's fascinating. All of you are fascinating. Do you have questions for each other before we sign off? Our audience is quiet tonight. Oh, we got a Q&A here from Gail. Will any of the authors be attending the Osher luncheon this June?
Yes.
I will.
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
Yes. Interesting. Oh, good. Maybe she'll come and introduce herself. All right. Do you want us to read there? Or do you want authors to read? Oh. Oh, good question. Do any of you have questions for one another?
Well, I just found all of the readings fascinating. So it's a delight, and it reminds me of why this is continued, Pam, so long since you started this. It's a really wonderful thing to,
I have a question for those who write poetry, because I find I'm lying there at 3 in the morning and thinking, oh Lord, that's a twist gee, I neglected to follow that thread or whatever. So I leap up and I rush over to my computer and I try to fix it. And then of course in the morning, it's not at all the way it should be. But I wondered if those who write poetry, do you find that's in your mind at odd moments during the day?
I find lines appear to me. I mean, I'm always feel like, oh, how wonderful a line came. But what I write in the middle of the night, when I scribble down, think, oh, this will be something great, is always terrible. I've never had anything succeed from my middle of the night muse.
Sounds familiar.
When we're talking about poetry, Elaine Clift, how did she get the idea for, and Elaine Clift has, of course, been an Osher study leader throughout the years. How did she decide on doing this anthology for the pandemic?
I think it was just, she had written a couple of poems and I think she got in contact with some people and they were writing poems, and she's done a couple of anthologies before this. And she thought it would be a great idea to bring everything together. And it was quite a feat to get this, to get all the permissions from everyone. And with 53 poets, it's huge. But she did a tremendous job, and it's a lovely anthology. I think there are so many different kinds of poems in there.
Yes, yes.
Hmm.
Here's two emails. Eugenia wants to know, did most of you find it easier to write after retirement?
I'm still working, so teaching part-time and writing part-time.
I don't know if it's easier, but I sure have a lot more time to do it. More time to read, yeah.
More time to do research too. That in terms of writing historical fiction has made a huge demand on time. And I don't know if I could have done it justice if I were still at my work desk.
Mary Lee says, this was a delightful event. Thanks so much to all of you. I now have a lot of new books to dive into.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. It was great.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you,
thank you. Yes.
everyone at Osher who helped make this possible. Sarah, there behind the scenes, and so.
Show yourself, Sarah, before we leave.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Is Sarah?
Hey, Sarah,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Sarah.
Hey, there you
Good
go.
job.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
I enjoyed it.
Yes,
Thanks, Pam.
me too.
Thank you very much, Pam.
Thank you for organizing. Pam.
Adios.
Great.
Good. Next time when we do this, we can have a reception in person,
Yeah,
probably.
that would be great.
Brilliant.
Good night. Good night.